Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into, well, a really fascinating stack of global headlines, articles, research, all sorts. Our mission, as always, is to cut through the noise, pull out those important nuggets of knowledge, and basically give you a shortcut to being well-informed. We aim for surprising facts, maybe a fresh perspective, and just enough humor to keep things moving.
That's right. And the sources today really do cover a lot of ground. We've got geopolitics, economic shifts, some critical environmental stuff, even space breakthroughs. The goal isn't just to tell you what's happening, but to help you see why these things matter, these events that seem pretty separate, how they might connect in ways you, well, might not expect. It's about seeing those currents underneath the surface.
Exactly. So settle in. We've got quite a bit to explore, and honestly, there are some really compelling threads to pull out here.
Okay, let's unpack this, right? First up, let's look at how history, like really deep history, is still shaping today's world. We've got this really striking contrast in our sources. Japan holding a solemn World War II memorial. And at basically the same time, China's planning this huge Victory Day parade. It's such a powerful difference in how history is, presented actively.
Yeah, and what's really insightful, I think, is how these commemorations aren't just looking back. They're active diplomatic signals happening right now. For Japan, it's often framed as remorse, reconciliation, especially towards neighbors. For China, that parade, it's about projecting strength, remembering sacrifice, victory against aggression. And these different stories, these narratives, they directly impact alliances, strategic leverage in the region today. It's not just reflecting on the past.
That makes sense. The idea that historical memory is actually a tool in current relations.
Yeah.
Can you, give an example? How does that play out day to day, maybe in a summit or something? Oh, absolutely. Think about, say, talks on trade deals in Asia or those tricky maritime disputes in the South China Sea. A country's historical grievances, real or perceived, they shape its negotiating position, how willing it is to cooperate, even just the public statements they make. These big commemorations, they reinforce national identity, sometimes nationalism too, and that sort of becomes the background music for all diplomacy. It can make even, a simple joint military exercise suddenly very politically charged.
It really highlights how tangled the past and present are. Okay, speaking of immediate pressing challenges, let's shift to the environment. Our next deep dive looks at this devastating heat wave in southern Europe. Spain, Greece, Portugal, Turkey really getting hit hard. One source quotes a really stark number, 1,500 heat-related deaths in Spain alone. Just awful. And it also notes, kind of darkly, that climate activists are shouting, "I told you so," while politicians check if sunscreen is tax-deductible.
Yeah, that heat wave and that death toll, it really forces us to look beyond just the what and ask why now. It seems to be exposing this dangerous gap between what we know scientifically about climate threats and the political system's actual ability, its capacity to make rapid systemic changes. It points to, well, potentially significant societal strain, maybe even collapse in certain vulnerable areas long before we hit some kind of global tipping point. It makes you ask, are we fundamentally ready for how fast these changes are coming?
That's a really sobering thought. And it shows how these global issues are connected, doesn't it? Like the political maneuvering we were just talking about.
Right.
It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's tied to economic realities, environmental pressures. Let's pivot back to the diplomatic stage for a minute. We've got this upcoming Alaska showdown between Trump and Putin mentioned in the sources. But interestingly, the sources also highlight stuff happening before the summit, like Zelenskyy meeting the UK's Keir Starmer. The source calls the main summit high-stakes diplomacy. And get this, the ice-cold sequel to Rocky the Feet.
Right, and that cluster of meetings tells you a lot. It's like this intricate, very public dance of alliances and power plays before the main event. It's not just about the big summit itself. It's all the positioning, the groundwork beforehand. Zelenskyy meeting Starmer, for example, Starmer being the opposition leader that signals Ukraine trying to lock in UK support, no matter who's in government later. You can almost feel the tension building, can't you? Key players having these preliminary chats, trying to shape the narrative, set the stage.
Okay, from that political chessboard to the global marketplace, let's talk economics. We've got this 90-day extension on the U.S.-China tariff truce. Sources say the markets are cheering, and there's this great analogy in one piece. It's basically just an economic Tinder date. Let's see where this goes. Economic Tinder. I love that. It really captures that sort of swipe right and hope feeling, But joking aside, what are the actual risks of these kind of temporary uncertain deals?
Well, that truce, yeah, it calms the markets for a bit, but it actually reveals something deeper, maybe. It shows both sides, the U.S. and China, are kind of implicitly accepting this state of let's call it managed instability. It specifically kicks the can down the road on the really tough structural issues like IP theft, forced tech transfer, state subsidies. Those are the core problems, not just market access. And that very uncertainty, it becomes a tool itself for strategic maneuvering and messes with global supply chains because companies just hesitate to make big long-term investments.
So yeah, a temporary patch-up, not really fixing the underlying issues. Which kind of leads me to think about balancing economic stuff with other things, like conservation. World Elephant Day came up in our sources. And there's this really stark irony you pointed out. Elephants get their 1 day of promised protection before going back to building malls on their habitats. Oof.
Oof is right. Yeah, that really throws a spotlight on the huge challenge of bridging the gap between, big symbolic gestures like World Elephant Day and the actual messy, often difficult work of protecting animals on the ground. It makes you wonder, are these days just for show? Or do they genuinely spark the concrete action needed? Especially when you've got relentless economic pressure for land and resources. It's easy to celebrate, right? Much harder to implement real, sustainable solutions when interests clash.
That's a critical point.
Oh.
And speaking of gatherings where interests might clash or align, Dubai just hosted the Indo-Global Leaders Forum, leaders discussing innovation, collaboration. One source cheekily called it the world's fanciest networking brunch.
Hey, yeah, that's probably not far off. It gives you good insight into how these high-level forums actually work. There's always this dual nature. You've got the official agenda, big speeches about global challenges, collaboration. But then there's the unspoken part, maybe the more important part. The intense networking, the relationship building among the global elite. A lot of the real outcomes, the business deals, the subtle shifts in alliances, they probably happen in the hallways over coffee, not necessarily in the main sessions.
Right, the real meeting versus the official one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift from global elites on the ground to, well, the stars. There's a new executive order making it easier for SpaceX to launch rockets. The source joked that Elon Musk's calendar now just says, Mom, tweet to launch Mars.
Huh. Well, it's not just general deregulation, though. This order specifically streamlines the really complex licensing process, the environmental reviews, stuff that's historically slowed down commercial launches. So by making launch permits easier to get, the government is basically hitting the accelerator on getting stuff into orbit. It allows companies like SpaceX to push the envelope in commercial space much, much faster. It's a very direct policy choice to boost innovation in that specific high-tech field.
Okay. Now, we need to turn to something much more somber. Truly tragic news out of Pittsylvania County, Virginia. Multiple law enforcement officers were shot. Just terrible. Our source's only comment on this was pretty direct and poignant. Our only comment here, fix the system before the system breaks you.
Yeah, and that comment, without taking any specific side, it really reflects a widespread societal concern, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About public safety and this deep feeling that systemic problems need systemic fixes. Events like this, they trigger these deeper questions about our society's fundamental structures, the support systems we have for law enforcement, yes, but also for the communities they serve. It points to a need for proactive change, not just reacting after the fact. It highlights this kind of collective desire for real improvements.
Yeah, desire for fundamental change.
Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates. Okay, shifting gears again from that solemn note to, well, sheer financial whiplash. Crypto. Bitcoin apparently just broke 124K. And the sources capture the reactions perfectly, I thought. You've got crypto bros rejoice, then banks try to remember if they laughed at Bitcoin in 2012, and kind of heartbreakingly, a guy who lost his wallet in 2011 is quietly screaming.
Right. And beyond just the price jump, what's really interesting about Bitcoin hitting, say, 124K, it's not just the volatility. It's how this kind of milestone marks its transition, really, from being this fringe experimental thing that traditional finance mostly laughed at to becoming a systemic factor, maybe still unpredictable, but one that influences broader financial stability. It's a moment where even the biggest skeptics have to, take it seriously. The humor really captures that journey from ridicule to, well, maybe reluctant acceptance or regret for some.
Definitely regret for the guy with the lost wallet. Okay, final point in our news roundup. India is gearing up for a big leadership event right before their Independence Day, and our source sets the scene with a bit of a wry smile. Expect speeches, photo ops, and at least one politician promising bullet trains that never come.
Yeah, and that captures that blend you often see, right? National celebration mixed with political messaging. These forums are platforms for both things, expressing huge national pride, definitely, but also communicating these really ambiguous visions for the future. Whether or not they're immediately doable, it's as much about projecting an image progress, strength onto the world stage, reinforcing national identity, as it is about, actual policy specifics or achievable timelines.
Wow. Okay, what an incredible range we've covered just now, from ancient history shaping diplomacy today to the future of space. Economic tightropes, digital currency madness, conservation paradoxes, elephants, and Elon Musk. It really does show how all these seemingly separate events weave together into this complex, constantly changing global picture.
It absolutely does. And that's the real value, I think, of looking closely at these individual nuggets of information. It pushes us to look past the headline, doesn't it? To think about the layers of context, the deep historical roots, the long-term implications that are often hiding in plain sight, subtly, or maybe not so subtly, shaping our world.
Right, and maybe that's the real takeaway for you listening. Consider this. If a temporary tariff truce can shift global supply chains, if how a nation remembers a war shapes its diplomacy now, what other headlines that seem unrelated are actually whispering secrets about much bigger interconnected changes happening just beneath the surface? Keep digging, because understanding those unseen connections, well, that's really the key to being truly well informed.